Yes, Matthias. We planned today to talk about automation technologies, right?
That's true, Olli. But during the preparation for this episode, we found out that there is another very important topic we should cover first, and that's the difference between automation and robotics.
Because many people mix that up.
Correct, including ourselves in the past. Now, hopefully, we know it better, and we are really eager to share this know how with you in episode number 3.
Automation Awakenings, your weekly dose of best practices for logistics automation.
All right. Welcome to episode number 3.
Yeah, everyone, thanks for joining. Happy to have you on board. And today we are going to talk about a quite tough and quite theoretical topic. So
Oh, yeah.
we're going to try to cut straight to the facts to make it as easy and as short as possible.
But after listening to the next couple of minutes, you will learn a lot and you will know what we are talking about.
Right. And that's why let us start with the definitions for these two terms. So let's start with automation. Olli, what's your definition of automation?
Yeah, well, my definition, I had to look that up, of course, because I wanted to be very precise and accurate. And I found a good definition which I really like, and that is automation is the use of methods for controlling industrial processes automatically, especially by electronically controlled systems, often reducing manpower.
Okay.
And what I really like about it, that you always need to either completely transform a manual process into an automated one, but it also can only reduce the human work there. And it's always about a system, a bigger ecosystem, something which needs to be controlled.
Okay, so basically, automation means that we have different actors, so to say, that need to interact with each other to optimize a certain process, which then has the ultimate goal to reduce or replace human interaction or human work.
Yeah, I think that brings it to the point.
Okay, cool. Then let's keep this in mind and maybe let's now jump on to the other term.
Robotics.
Correct. And from my point of view, robotics is to be defined as a field that combines engineering and computer science to design and build robots to perform certain tasks.
Yeah, pretty clear.
Pretty clear. Not more than that, not less than that. Simply focusing on building some piece of hardware which is capable of executing certain tasks. Right?
Yeah, cool. Okay, then let's have a look now on the different types for these two terms.
Yeah.
So let's start with automation, right? What types are existing there?
Right. So in literature, there is a distinction between two different types of automation. The first type of automation that is defined is software automation. And then we have industrial automation. So let me first dive into the topic of software automation and then move on. So for software automation, as software automation, we define automation processes that are mainly or exclusively using software. Let me provide you two examples that you might know from daily business. First example is robotic process automation, also known as RPA. And that's basically a technology that allows a software robot to use a certain application interface to mimic or reproduce human actions in this very interface. So a very easy example from my point of view would be an Excel macro,
Yeah, that's very easy.
which is, but it is basically mimicking what you as a human would do in your spreadsheet. And basically you're recording those different steps. And you then basically release those different steps by pushing a play button.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very easy example. Let's say more advanced example would be a chatbot that you often run into when you get in touch with support teams of different organizations.
Like Ask Anna or
Yeah,
whoever.
exactly.
And you think you're talking to a human, and then you figure out, oh, it was a chatbot.
Yeah. So there is better and worse chatbots, of course. So some of them are quite clear bots. Some are quite good. But in the end, that's a classic example for RPA. Another nice example for software automation would be intelligent process automation, which is basically next level RPA, and which has a quite nice acronym because it's called IPA. So some of us who are into beer will now have a quite nice taste or image in their head. But IPA stands for Intelligent Process Automation, and it basically describes a technology that uses not only RPA, but also business process management, analytics, and also sometimes artificial intelligence to get a job done.
Oh my God, so many buzzwords, and it sounds pretty complex. What is it, Matthias? I need an example here.
Yeah, a very easy example would be an application or a bot, so to say, which is executing your bill payment.
Okay, and that's complex because I need to scan the bills. I need to understand what's there. I need to decide if the bill is correct or not.
Yeah. So what I learned is that the moment when there is some kind of also judgment-based decisions involved that are not simply a reproduction of certain work steps, you would rather talk about intelligent process automation.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously when you get bills in, it's not just enough to read out the amount somewhere and then book it into your ERP system, but you maybe want to go back to some database, check if the amount is correct. You want to make sure that taxes are included, whatever. So there's way more steps to be done, and then there's way more judgment to also be executed by the bot. So it's not like with a chat where you just really answer to a set of predefined topics. It's really more advanced, and this would be the intelligent process automation.
Yeah, that sounds really advanced.
Right, so that would be the software automation part, and then let's move on to the industrial automation part, which is way more the topic of our podcast as well, since automation, industrial automation refers to processes that are automated by using physical robots and or special control systems. And in that context, industrial automation may also include robot automation.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you go ahead and you really, you use robots and these special control systems to automate a physical process, say, for example, a production line in a plant, you're not talking about software-based automation, obviously, because there is robot hardware involved in this kind of automation. And that's why there is this term of industrial automation that was created exactly for this kind of use case.
That sounds good. I think this describes very well what our podcast is all about.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to be diving into the industrial automation field, and then in very specific into the logistics industrial automation field, while of course also taking a closer look at robotics and the different solutions that are available. And that's why maybe it's also time to take a closer look into robotics and see whether we have some different kinds or categories here, same to what we saw with automation.
You are listening to the Automation Awakenings podcast.
All right, so let's take a look into robotics. And with robotics, there is basically two different or big groups that you can name. So the first group or the first kind of robotics is semi-autonomous robots. So that's robots that perform tasks on their own, but which still have some level of human intervention or interaction that is needed. So a classic cobot, from my point of view, would be a semi-autonomous application.
Because it's working together with a human at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So there is some interaction still, and it's taken over a particular task at a particular, let's say, workstation. For example, lifting something up for the human, but then still needing the human to, for example, locate this weight onto some other device.
Or provide the right tool or whatever.
Yeah, right. So semi-autonomous. And then, of course, we have also the group of autonomous robots, which is the second group or the second kind that we see in robotics. And that's robots that have a certain intelligence to perform their task entirely on their own.
Yeah, so this would be our famous transport robots where, I think we will talk about a lot about them in the future.
Correct. So the field of AMRs, the autonomous mobile robots, already even carries this word in its name, and it definitely indicates that this particular robot is smart enough to take its own decisions and really decide on its own, depending on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think let's move on and do the conclusion. Hope we have you guys still on board, even though the topic is somewhat theoretical. But my key takeaway from reading into this topic and preparing this episode is that basically robotics is a subcategory of industrial automation. And another takeaway is that there are cases where we see only automation in work. There is use cases where we only see robotics in work, but there is also a lot of use cases where both automation and robotics are interacting with each other. And many of the use cases that we're going to discuss in the future are exactly a mixture of both automation and robotics.
Yeah, I think this is an important foundation we laid today for all further episodes in the future. So you understand what is the field and what we will address in the next episodes. So I know today a more theoretical part, but important to know where we are.
Exactly. So Automation Awakenings, all about robotics in the field of industrial automation. That's our goal, that's our purpose. And starting next week, Monday, we're going to dive deeper into those different technologies that are available. We are excited to have you on board again. Thanks for joining today's session. Wish you a great rest of the day. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you, Matthias, for this nice conclusion, which brings it really to the point. So looking forward to all further episodes.
This was another episode of the Automation Awakenings podcast. Visit us at automation-awakenings.com.